3000 NFL mock draft. It is December 29th, 2015, and this is the weekly draft podcast where we're talking about the NFL draft, college football, the NFL as far as right now. We're looking at draft order with one more week left to go, playoffs, how we're going to take a look at the Seahawks, and we're going to talk about some of the bowl games coming up. We're finally up to that stretch now where the bowl games that carry some significance in terms of relevancy are about to go down. So we'll be talking about all that, and coming up later, Jacson Bevens, who Twitter people know at Jacson Bevens very well as fieldgoals.com with Cigar Thoughts and the Cigar Thoughts podcast. But just as we begin to set to tape here on Tuesday, it's only been moments ago that the Philadelphia Eagles fired Chip Kelly as the head coach and, well, any other title that he had there in Philadelphia. And we talked about Chip Kelly, if not last week, we've talked about him within the last few weeks several times, if he could be a fit for the Tennessee Titans, if the Philadelphia Eagles would even offer any sort of trade talk or even think to participate in such talk. And it turns out, no, they will not be participating in any talk. They're just going to let him go and figure out what he wants to do, despite back-to-back 10-6 winning seasons. Obviously, this season didn't go as well, but the problems go much deeper for the Philadelphia Eagles and Chip Kelly than just a 6-9 record or, playing poorly this season. It's about all of the changes made to fit Chip Kelly, all the money spent and draft picks to do exactly what Chip Kelly wanted, and it hasn't worked out, Rob. So what exactly are your initial thoughts here on, why the Eagles fired Chip Kelly and whether or not it was justified?
Well, I just wonder if he's kind of manipulated this situation to sort of force his exit. I mean, there was a report from Adam Schefter a few weeks ago that said essentially Chip Kelly and the Eagles were sick of the sight of each other. So maybe it's been on the cards for a while and they've just decided, why even wait until next Monday to make this decision? Let's just do it now, get a head start on who they want to replace him. I think it's an interesting one for Philadelphia because they've allowed Chip Kelly to completely change the outlook of that roster, and then a year later have fired him. So whoever takes over now is going to inherit a team full of Chip Kelly's handpicked guys. They were bringing in former Oregon players, and they made the big trade with Sean McCoy to get his old linebacker from Oregon, who was at Buffalo, to get him over. They made a lot of changes there, brought in Sam Bradford, who's going to be a free agent now, and you would imagine would probably leave Philadelphia and not come back next year because Kelly is gone. So whoever takes over is going to be left with a pretty significant rebuild. They're probably not going to have a quarterback that they can believe in and trust in. So it's a huge situation for Philadelphia, and you kind of wonder what is next for Chip Kelly. People are going to immediately link him with Tennessee, but there's a lot of things that Tennessee have to think about there in terms of whether they want to make that move and whether they want to go straight in with Chip Kelly after he was just fired by the Eagles.
Yeah, well, what would you say was, from his standpoint of Chip Kelly, of all the moves that he made in the offseason, a lot of the high-profile moves, and switching out at the three starting positions on offense that we know most about, quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. Every single one of those guys that he got rid of is on a team right now that has a better record than the Eagles. I'm kind of curious which one if you were Jeff Lurie, the Eagles owner, is there one particular move that really would have upset you? Because I think for me, not so much necessarily making DeMarco Murray a high-paid running back in today's NFL, but making him a high-paid running back that doesn't even seem like the starter most days.
I think one of the big things for me is that he took a really dynamic offense that was just full of playmakers like Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson and LeSean McCoy, and just basically got rid of all of them and then tried to replace them with guys who either didn't quite fit his scheme in DeMarco Murray or players who were just worse. And, a lot of people like Jordan Matthews, who was at Vanderbilt, and I never really took to him in college, and he had a great combine, but I was never a big fan. And if you want to argue that he's better than Deshaun Jackson or Jeremy Maclin, I just can't see that. And that was the guy that he brought in. They drafted Nelson Aguilar, who I did like, out of USC, and he's just not been able to have an impact. He's had some injury issues there. So that's what would frustrate me, is that you've kind of inherited Chip Kelly, this really dynamic offense is what you always had at Oregon. And rather than sort of focus your attention on getting the quarterback that can kind of make it tick, you've gone the other way and you've tried to completely rebuild the skill position group at Philadelphia. He upset a lot of the players there. He has a certain way of doing things. And I think the one thing we've learned about him is that his scheme and the way that he wants to operate doesn't work as well in the NFL as it does in college. So the Seahawks game last year against Philadelphia was a great example of this, where Mark Sanchez and the fast pace of the offense, snap the ball after 10, 15 seconds. That's great if you can sustain a drive. If you're getting off the field after 30, 45 seconds of game time, and then you're putting your defense on the field for, long stretches, you're hopeless with time of possession, your defense is getting gassed, and it's just not going to work that way with a 53-man roster. In college, you've got a lot more players at your disposal. You can sort of check, you can rest guys, you can play at a fast pace on offense, and you can also keep your defense fresh. In the NFL, it doesn't work like that. And I think that he has to adjust his scheme. He has to appreciate that. And I think he has to run a more ball control style. I think that's probably what he was thinking when he brought in DeMarco Murray. But it's kind of contradictory. You're going to bring him in for ball control, but then you're still going to get your quarterback trying to snap it after 10 or 15 seconds. The plan just didn't work. And many people could argue that the Eagles are just right to move on.
Okay, so let's say Chip Kelly orchestrated it, or if Philadelphia just wanted to, fire him. I mean, when you look at the Eagles, it's not so much that they're just 6-9 or they're disappointing. I mean, there's 28th scoring defense, 30th in total defense, 31st in touchdowns allowed, 29th in rushing defense, 29th in turnovers. Just a really bad team that plays in the NFC East. And to come out of that side, there's definitely reasons for that. But from Chip Kelly's point of view, where do you see it working best now? Because he can either go to, college, he can go back to college and then rebuild a program and, find out a job like Tennessee or something like that. Though, a lot of those jobs that are maybe more desirable have already been filled. And then you've got perhaps an NFL team where he can be a coordinator for a year or two at a team that, he sees he has the pieces in place that he likes. Or perhaps just because Philadelphia doesn't like him, maybe the Titans like him and they want to make that marriage happen between Mariota. What's the next best move for Chip Kelly?
It really depends how much he's willing to adapt and what he wants from the rest of his life. Because if he has sort of that itch that he wants to scratch, if his burning ambition is to be a Super Bowl winning head coach, then the best thing he should do is try and get straight back into the NFL and take the best job available to him. I'm just not convinced that he feels that way. I mean, they had to twist his arm to get him out of Oregon to take on the NFL challenge. It hasn't worked after 3 years in Philadelphia, and he may well think the best thing for me is to just take a year off to sort of reflect on what happened there and then make a better decision next year. Oregon didn't have a great year in terms of their performance in the Pac-12 this year. And if they're bringing in another transfer quarterback for the new season, and if it doesn't work next year, who's to say that the Oregon Ducks won't just say, hey, do you want your old job back? I mean, he might think that that's the most appealing thing for him. Or he could just sort of sit around and wait for the next big high-profile college coaching gig to come up and then take that. That's one option. That might be the best option. For the Titans, I mean, everybody wants to sort of bring them both together, but you do sort of have to wonder. I mean, it would make the Titans relevant again, and it does make a certain degree of sense because Mariota and Chip Kelly have worked together before. But you also wonder whether or not, everything that I've heard, Kenny, in the last few days is that some of the high-profile coaches, your guys like Josh McDaniels and people like that, the one job that they would really sort of want that is likely to be, is available, is Tennessee, because you inherit a quarterback in Marcus Mariota who's had a very good rookie year. You're playing a terrible AFC South, so you've got a legitimate chance to win the division next year. And you've got a decent core of young talent on offense. You've got a good left tackle. You've got Mariota. You've got Dorial Green-Beckham. And you've got other players like Delaney Walker who've had a good year. So, yeah, you could go to Chip Kelly, or are you going to look at this and say, well, why? You know, Mariota's shown so much progress as a pocket passer. Maybe the best thing is to get a really good offensive, creative mind installed, working with Mariota, get a new GM in instead of Rustin Webster, and sort of rebuild that way, as opposed to just going for the college coach and hoping that it's going to work this time, because Tennessee must be wondering, there must be sort of that little bit at the back of their mind thinking, why hasn't it worked in Philadelphia? And do we really want to sort of 3 years down the line be doing this all again? I mean, Tennessee have been bad ever since Jeff Fisher left. They're going to be appointing their third coach in a few years. You know, they've got to get this right. And is Chip Kelly a realistic long-term option? That's what they've got to ask.
Yeah, I know Jacson Bevens, our guest later, has some opinions on this. So we'll swing back to it later and just sort of talk about those moves that the Eagles have made, because despite, you know, a couple 10-win seasons, in hindsight, maybe the draft picks weren't so good. Maybe the free agent moves and the trades were not so good, and what the Eagles are left with. We haven't talked at all about college games and as far as the Bulls are concerned. And today Cal played a game against Air Force in which Jared Goff, who has not been your favorite quarterback prospect, though, you know, I don't think that you have anything against him as a quarterback prospect, perhaps not as strong as Paxton Lynch. Though, would you say that your opinion today has changed after Goff throws 6 touchdowns, no interceptions in the bowl game? Obviously, that's going to draw a lot of attention, but, you know, is it enough to – how much emphasis should we be placing on just one game against Air Force? What are your thoughts today on Goff's performance?
My opinion didn't change at all based on what happened today. I mean, he was playing Air Force. So, you know, California won 55-36 against Air Force. You know, congratulations to them. I would have expected this type of performance before the game. He wasn't coming up against a great defense. And when he's played weaker defenses this year, he's generally put up big numbers. What concerns me about Goff is that when he sort of played tougher teams, I'm thinking back to Utah when they lost on the road. You know, he only completed just above 50% of his passes. He threw 5 interceptions. When they went on the road to USC, you know, another couple of interceptions there. When they lost to Oregon, I'm just looking at the stats here, against Oregon, he completed 44% of his passes. And again, threw another interception. So in the bigger games, and this was always the issue with Jared Goff, and it's why he reminds me a little bit of Brock Osweiler, is that in terms of their college careers, is that he could throw fantastic, pretty-looking throws, and you would say that is one of the best throws I've seen in college football this year, where he would split 2 defensive backs and put it into a really tight window because he's got a great arm. But then you would have a random game and a big game against a tough opponent where he would just have a meltdown and he'd make 2 or 3 terrible decisions, you know, turn the ball over, and you'd be left scratching your head. And
okay, so a lot of people are going to have him in the first round. So with all of that being said, what's the best fit for Jared Goff then? What's his skill set going to work best for in the NFL in terms of what's going to maximize his standing for a team looking to draft a quarterback that will have the chance to draft him?
I think that the best thing for him is to go to a team that has got a very clear thought on what they want to do offensively. You know, he has got some ability there. He can be a pocket passer. He's got a nice arm. I mean, he could be somewhere between sort of Jay Cutler and Brock Osweiler in terms of a prospect. I think he's a perfectly acceptable quarterback that you could draft in round 1 and believe that you could win with. And, you know, I'd have no issue with it. If a team takes him in the top 10, Kenny, then you'd say fair enough. You know, he's got arm talent. You know, you can work with him. And I think if you work with someone like Adam Gase, I think he's a really good offensive coordinator, if he ends up getting a head coaching job, then that might be a good fit for him, because Gase's system, and he's done a great job with Jay Cutler for the most part this year. That would be a good fit for him, I think.
What about, like, if he was, it sounds a lot of the things that you say, and from there, like, I just keep thinking of the 2011 draft, and it's like, does he fit in somewhere with that Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, Christian Ponder, where you just need to get a quarterback and it doesn't matter? And there's just no other options for us right now other than a quarterback. Would you say he fits in with some of those guys?
I think he's a lot better than someone like Christian Ponder. Just had a terrible arm. He had a number of surgeries to sort of his shoulders, and I think he had an elbow injury in college, and it showed. And his arm was just not strong, and he made bad decisions. So he should not have been anywhere near the first round. I thought he was sort of like a last day pick, and it was incredible that he went in the first. Jake Locker was just too erratic. Great athlete, not a great quarterback. I always kind of like Blaine Gabbert at Missouri, but I think he's had a tough. He's been dealt a tough hand, and I think he's shown in flashes that there is something there at San Francisco. I think Goff is a technically good quarterback, and if he gets time and he gets the right system, I think that he can produce. I mean, he could be. Maybe his ceiling is sort of Matt Ryan at his best, kind of that guy, because he's got an arm talent, he's got size, he's got some ability, he's an accurate passer, he can be surgical at times. I think that he's got a good future in the right team with the right system. I mean, he could have a similar impact to Derek Carr. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why he can't do that. I just personally think that Paxton Lynch is a better overall prospect. I think that you can win with Paxton Lynch. I think that teams will look at what Cam Newton has done this year and think, well, Paxton Lynch is not Cam Newton, but maybe he can be like a poor man's version of him. And I think for that reason, Paxton Lynch is probably going to end up going within the top 5.
So who do you have? Do you have any second round quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, there's one or two. I mean, Carson Wentz at North Dakota State is probably going to go in that range. He may sneak into round 1, and he's very similar to sort of Paxton Lynch in that he's tall, he's big, he's mobile. He can throw it downfield. He's a smaller school guy, which may limit his stock. But I really like him. There's one or two others that will go in the second round. I mean, Christian Hackenberg might go into the second round just because of his arm talent, although I think that he really needs time and should go a little bit later than that. I could see a team being enamored with Jacoby Brissett at NC State and the way that he's played. Was transferred from Florida. There's definitely something to work with there. And whether or not he's going to go as early as round 2, I'm not sure. But a team could bring him in maybe in round 3 or 4 and work on him over a couple of years, and he could have a solid future. And of course, there's Connor Cook as well at Michigan State, who I just think the teams are going to be really turned off because of his attitude. Teammates don't like him at Michigan State. I saw a report recently that just says he enjoys being a celebrity too much, and I just think that teams are going to be turned off him. And he may go in the second round based on what he's shown on tape, but I think that teams will be wary about making him their sort of franchise quarterback.
So through the sets of bowl games that we have had so far, has there been any players that have stood out to you that we, because we've been talking all season long, literally, about college football? We've named off, I don't know about maybe hundreds, but plenty dozens of players. Is there anyone that has now made a stink because they had a big bowl game or they had a big play that you've gone back and taken another look at their tape or whatever you can find on them, and now you're starting to have a new opinion, perhaps? Any sleepers out there from the bowl games?
I think one of the guys that I wanted to go back and have a look at was Tyler Boyd at Pittsburgh, and he didn't have an amazing bowl game or anything, but it did sort of jog my memory that watching him play against Navy, that I wanted to go back and reassess him, and he's just such a fantastic football player. And I think that the combine's going to be big for him, proving that he can run as fast as some of the other guys as a receiver. But he's just the heart and soul of everything. Pittsburgh won something like 8 or 9 games this year, Kenny. And when he enters the draft this year in 2016, I'm pretty sure that Pittsburgh are going to be horrible again next year. The Pitt Panthers will be bad again next year, and it's because they'll have lost Tyler Boyd. He is just everything to that team. And I think that if he can sort of run in the 4.4s, I think there's every chance that he could end up going in the top 20. He sort of caught my eye. Perkins at UCLA, it was great to watch him again. I enjoyed watching Josh Rosen again for UCLA and sort of thinking that he, has got a big future there. Apart from that, there's nobody who really sticks out. Nate Sudfeld is an interesting quarterback that teams might look at in the middle round range, and he may well get an opportunity, a bit like Kirk Cousins, 1 or 2 years down the line, and might be able to prove that he's got a future. I know that there's going to be a lot of people shouting at the screen or at their phone or whatever, listening to this, Kenny, saying, when are you going to talk about the guys at Washington State and Washington? But the problem is that neither of their games were televised over here, so I've not seen either.
Uh-oh. It was good to see the Cougs get a win there over the Miami Hurricanes. Were you at all surprised to see the result?
No, I wasn't surprised. I was pleased because I thought that it'd be a tough game because they've changed their coach and they'd want to impress. Miami have got some talent that just hasn't been utilized properly. So I think it was good I've heard about the game. I think it was good that they didn't just rely on, incredible passing numbers just to win the game, that the defense actually showed up again. And that's encouraging for them going into next year, that they can win in different ways. And I think they proved that, so good for them. And in terms of Washington winning against Southern Miss, it's a game you'd expect them to win. It should have been a formality for them, and it ended up being that way with the score. But both teams go into next year, and rightly so, there's a lot of optimism there.
Yeah, I know that you talked about Joe Dahl and perhaps would he be a fit with the Seahawks, and talked maybe a little bit about Gabe Marks, who's going back to school. I don't know. I think most people still have him perhaps as a day 3 pick at best right now, and that's fine as well. The records and all that kind of stuff that he has an opportunity at next year. It is an air raid offense. That being said, were there any other players on Washington State maybe that you do like for the NFL, and also just sort of, Luke Falk's got 2 more years, and we know the track record of quarterbacks that have played for Mike Leach as far as the NFL goes doesn't always go that well. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on Luke Falk and perhaps anybody else on Washington State.
Yeah, I like Falk, and he's shown a lot of qualities that you would expect would get him a chance at the NFL level. I hope that he sort of sticks the course really with Mike Leach and goes through his career, because I think there's a chance with Washington State to do something special over the next couple of years. And we've seen with Mike Leach that he almost went undefeated with Texas Tech and almost made the national title a few years ago when they had Michael Crabtree there. And if they can keep some consistency on offense, they've got a chance to do special things. And then we can talk about his NFL career. I think the one guy who kind of stands out the most, as you mentioned, is Joe Dahl. Whether he plays left tackle at the next level or not remains to be seen. His pass protection was very good until he got injured. I could easily see him moving inside and playing competently at guard. I think that he could play right tackle as well. But he seems to have a bright future, and it wouldn't be a shock at all if he's healthy enough to sort of participate in all the off-season stuff, whether he could actually promote his stock, and if he has a good combine, maybe even get into sort of that day 2 range.
So we've got a few more bowl games coming up now, and I'm just what are some of the news stories coming out that are really grabbing your attention that as far as college football goes, or the championship games or something like that have really got your attention that you want to see really come out, or what you're curious as what will happen in the next week or 2?
Well, there's a few different storylines that have been interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing Auburn against Memphis. We talked about Paxton Lynch. It's his last opportunity to impress before probably turning pro, and he's going to play an SEC team. For Auburn, it's a last chance to probably see Sean Coleman before the draft as well. A player we've talked about an awful lot on here, and I've got a real good feeling that he is going to still make that jump when it gets to combine time. And people are looking at this situation. I could see him sort of really moving up the board. I want to see Texas A&M against Louisville, because Texas A&M are just a mess at the moment. A lot of their players, they're high-profile recruits over the last couple of years, are transferring, and there seems to be a lot of issues there. So I want to see if they can, how it's affecting them against a fairly solid Louisville team led by Bobby Petrino. And then, of course, we've got the playoff games coming up. I think Oklahoma-Clemson in particular stands out. I like what Oklahoma did towards the end of the year. They've got quite a few NFL prospects, Charles Tapper and Eric Stryker, and one or two others on offense as well. And then Michigan State against Alabama is a game that I thoroughly expect Alabama just to absolutely take control of that game, and I think handily beat Michigan State. But it'll set us up for a very interesting national title game. And maybe the one other bowl game that I'm really interested in is Notre Dame against Ohio State. it's Ohio State going to have like a real load of players that could potentially go in the first round. This is their last game probably for Ohio State before they turn pro, and they're going to come up against a Notre Dame team which itself has got quite a few players that could go in the first round, led by Jalen Smith. I really like Will Fuller, who's got a chance to go in that first frame. I'm not a big fan of Ronnie Stanley, but he's going to be playing in that one. There's Martin, who's Nick Martin, who's Zach Martin's brother, who's been playing center for Notre Dame, is playing in that one. So there's precisely the running back is really good there as well. So there's one or two different guys at Notre Dame, and they're coming up against NFL talent at Ohio State. So that is one to sort of circle and watch, and that's on the 1st of January.
And these guys that end up coming up to, that are in some of these bowl games coming up and the one I've already played, obviously we're talking about some of the guys that are going to be in that top 5 range. Right now, the Tennessee Titans are, all they have to do is lose this week, and they'll be picking first overall. And then the Cleveland Browns, if the Titans win and the Browns lose, then it'll be the Browns. Then I guess if both lose, it'll still be the Titans. So the Titans, very good chance of getting that first overall pick. We can still settle in. We talked about Chip Kelly and how desirable that job may be. I mean, even if the job seems desirable because you have Marcus Mariota and perhaps the first overall pick, there's got to be some concern that you're still taking over the Tennessee Titans, a team that was picking second last year is going to pick first or second this year. Very much not a good-looking team. Not a lot of talent in Tennessee. There's going to have to be a lot of work done. Who do you think is going to benefit the most from the first overall pick? Would it be the Titans or the Browns, or does it really not matter this year? Even though it's nice to say you have the first overall pick, that maybe it's not that big of a deal this year with the way the top 2 or 3 guys are.
Well, I think that it doesn't really matter who has it, whether it's Tennessee or Cleveland, because Tennessee are not going to take a quarterback. So if they have the first overall pick, they're not going to be any danger there. I think that most people expect that Cleveland, rightly or wrongly, they're just going to part ways with Johnny Manziel, and that he's probably going to have a chance to go on, which is what I think he really wants, which is to be part of the Dallas Cowboys and back up Tony Romo there. So, if Cleveland goes quarterback and Tennessee go for, whether it's Laramie Tunsil or Joey Bosa or even Jalen Smith at Notre Dame, whoever they take, with that top pick, it's probably going to be a different target than Cleveland. So it doesn't really matter who has number 1 and who has number 2. But the fact that Tennessee have got Mariota, they've got Taylor Lewan, they've got Dorial Green Beckham on offense, they've got some talent on defense. They play in a crappy division, and they've got the chance to have the number 1 overall pick. Will make that a really attractive job for whoever whether it's Chip Kelly or whether it's one of the really upcoming offensive coordinators, whether it's Adam Gase, whether it's Josh McDaniel again or somebody like that. It's going to be really attractive to a lot of big names.
I can't even believe we always speak of the top 2 or the top 3 or the top 5. I can't believe the Baltimore Ravens right now are picking 8th. They win another game, they're not even in the top 10. And you look at them top to bottom, that's, to me, is the worst roster in the NFL right now. So John Harbaugh, the job that he has done, I think, in a way, this could be his best season ever as a coach. And, Chip Kelly just got fired at 6-9, and I'm looking at John Harbaugh almost like they may finish with the same record. And John Harbaugh, I think, to get that much credit, they're going out there with Ryan Mallett and beating the Steelers. All of their starters pretty much on IR. It's pretty amazing to see the job that they've done, although maybe it's going to cost them a top 10 pick, at least for sure a top 4 pick or top 5 pick. So I'm curious about whether, what's going on there. As I said earlier, we have a guest today, and Jacson right now to talk about many a topic. Jacson, as you can probably assume, we start out at the top of the hour talking about Chip Kelly, and I'm just kind of curious. Yeah. First of all, welcome for coming on to the welcome to the show. Why don't you just give me your thoughts? See, I know that you sound like a Chip Kelly fan to me. Do you think that this was justified?
Well, yeah, I think that if they had kept Chip Kelly as the head coach, and instead of letting him shop for all of the groceries himself, paired him up with a GM that was philosophically aligned, I I think that you could count on 10-win seasons from them every year. But he really kind of salted the fields with that roster over the offseason once he got in charge of personnel. And it's really too bad because I do think that Chip Kelly is one of the most forward-thinking and creative coaches that the NFL has seen in a long time, and it's not gimmicky. I mean, it seemed like it a little bit at first, but really it's something that is sustainable. And they won 20 games in their first 2 years, and they just didn't have the right pieces, and that falls on him. So I am still a big Chip Kelly believer. I think that he's the type of guy that as he develops a philosophy at the NFL level, and Pete Carroll talks about that a lot, how long it took him to develop that philosophy and how being fired by the Jets and Patriots were big parts of developing that philosophy and realizing what is and isn't going to work at the NFL level as a head coach. So Chip Kelly is still fairly young by NFL head coaching standards. I don't see a whole lot of reason why he won't land on his feet somewhere, and my guess is he'll be one of the top 1 or 2 head coaching candidates this offseason, so he may very well get to pick wherever he goes. So I was surprised it happened this early, but I really think that the mistake was giving him control over personnel. I still think Chip Kelly is a really viable head coach with a chance for a lot of success.
Yeah, we also sort of, as you can imagine, got into what would be next for him or what would be the best thing for him. And, you could talk about maybe he could just focus on running an offense right now, or maybe he could go to college, or maybe there is an opening with Cleveland or Tennessee or something like that that might pair well. So if you were Chip Kelly, what would be your next move that you think this is what is going to get me on the right track?
I think if I were Chip Kelly, I would have some leverage in my negotiations. I'm going to be sought after, and still the type of coach I think that a fan base would get excited about. So I think I would kind of interview my interviewers a little bit about, hey, if I'm not going to be bringing in players, can I get a John Schneider or, whoever it may be, to use a close to home example. But that, in Seattle, you've got a head coach and a GM that want the same things and are trying to bring in players to fit a certain philosophy and a certain formula. I think that that's what I would be looking for if I'm Chip Kelly, but I think I'm also going to be looking for a team that has some defensive depth, because the thing that gets overlooked about playing at the Chip Kelly pace is that your defense is on the field for a whole lot more snaps too, and defensive snaps just are more tiring than offensive snaps, especially up front. In college, you can carry 110 guys, and you can roll 4 deep on the D-line and just cycle guys in and stay fresh. So it doesn't matter if they're on the field for 80 games. But in the NFL, it's really difficult to do. And I think that as much as anything is why Philly's defenses have struggled, is just it's so much fatigue. It's so many snaps. So I would be looking for a team with some defensive depth, and I'd be thinking really hard about how to keep my pace going and still put the pressure on the defense that he's always done, but finding a way to kind of cushion the blow to the defense as well.
Rob, what was were there any of those sort of thoughts there with Kelly? Now that we've talked about it a little bit more, when you see what can happen to a guy like Chip Kelly, and perhaps nobody in the NFL has more power over a team except for Bill Belichick, and then to a certain extent, however much you want to interpret the relationship with Pete Carroll and John Schneider, if he can get fired because the Eagles really won all their chips in their baskets, I want to ask you both though, some of the other coaches that you expect to get let go next week, or as we learned today, perhaps any day now.
Well, before we get on to that, I mean, there's a really interesting quote from Jay Glazer. It's just emerged on social media. He says that he's talked to Chip Kelly, who has insisted that he wants to stay in the NFL, not in college. So that would suggest that he is probably going to be actively looking for jobs right now. He's not going to take like a year off to reflect on what has happened at Philadelphia and then come back. So that maybe increases the likelihood that Tennessee consider him. But again, Tennessee have got to work out what they want. They want to buy into Chip Kelly and Mariota as a package that is really going to work for them. Or are they going to want to go in a different direction? Mariota's shown that he can be a pocket pass this year. They want to sort of try and go back to sort of the Oregon style of doing things, or do they want to go in a different direction now? So big decision for them. In terms of other coaches that are going to lose their job, I think Chuck Pagano is definitely going to be out. That seemed inevitable from about week 2 of this year. In terms of some of the others, Mike Pettin is. You kind of think that he's got to be gone. Listening to the noises coming out of Cleveland, we know that Gus Bradley's going to survive for at least one more year. Mike McCoy seems to have done a pretty terrible job at San Diego this year, and if they're going to LA, there's been talk that maybe Sean Payton would be interested in that job, and likewise, is Sean Payton still going to be in New Orleans? Is there going to be a change of the New York Giants? That has to be another one that people are going to think about here. And then there's Jim Tomsula, who's been thoroughly useless as the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, but the way that the 49ers have gone about their business in the last sort of 12 months, you would probably think they'll give him a raise and a contract extension.
Jackson, what do you think? Like, were any of the names on the chopping block you think unfairly there, or are there anybody's that you're seeing that, I think for me personally, the last couple of years, and I mean not just me, but I think other people as well, just sort of laughing at, the fact that Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano could get by with a below-average team that just won 11 games in a terrible division. Is there anyone out there that might have 9 or 10 or 11 wins that you don't think is a very good coach?
Well, one that I think is really interesting in terms of having a lot of talent is Detroit. But the fact that their head coach survived the mass midseason firings makes me think that they don't think he's the issue. But that would be a really interesting head coaching position, because I think there's still a lot of talent on that roster. And as far as Chip Kelly goes, having guys like Golden Tate and Amir Abdullah is pretty attractive in terms of the type of player that can be successful in his system. And he loves tight ends, and they've got a good one potentially in Ebron, and I think they've got some defensive depth. So, but that said, if they didn't fire their head coach at the halfway point, they probably won't do it afterwards. I still think Cleveland is a fairly talented team. That organization seems like they just got no sense of anything. Giants are. I think the Giants are still a pretty talented team. I can't imagine a bigger culture change than Tom Coughlin to Chip Kelly in terms of just being forward-thinking versus kind of stuck in their ways. But yeah, I don't know. The Giants one I think is really, really interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Coughlin's the longest tenured coach in the NFL at his current job, besides Belichick?
No, I'm pretty. I don't think that Tom Coughlin came in before Bill Belichick.
That's what I'm saying. Besides Belichick?
Oh, besides Belichick, Coughlin must have been paired with Eli Manning in 2004. That's
Wow.
I know they've been together for their entire careers, so that's what it is, and it makes sense to me that if the Giants were picking 4th overall, they probably fired the guy before that, unless So yeah, I would say that sounds right to me.
How long's Marvin Lewis been in Cincy? Is he?
Marvin Lewis probably would have also.
And
Actually, Marvin Lewis was 2003 probably.
The Marvin Lewis thing is crazy because for years when they were having all of their issues, I couldn't believe that he kept surviving year to year. I was like, what do they see in this guy? And slowly, they've built something that's really impressive over there. So I was definitely wrong about that.
I somewhat respect the move. As long as you feel that the guy's in the right, has got the right. It's kind of cheesy, but his heart's in the right place. If he seems like a smart guy, and he's giving you putting you in a position every year to feel good about yourself. I think that's partly what Gus Bradley starts to get going on right now with Jacksonville, and he's got that relationship with Shad Khan. Then again, you have the other situations where a guy can get fired 2 seasons into his career, 1 season. That So I guess you just got to play it base to base, but you do like the fact that Gus Bradley is getting a fourth season?
Yeah, I like that Gus Bradley's getting a fourth season. They needed to see the spark that they've seen over the last 6 weeks from that team in order to justify it. I understand they had further to go in terms of roster construction than probably anyone in the NFL when Bradley took that job, and it just takes a long time to stock the cupboards. But you can't just keep winning 2 or 3 games a year, right? You have to make that progress. And I think we're seeing it, and I think they've got their quarterback. Is he going to be a great one? Who knows? But he's showing that, okay, we don't need to start over at that position. And I think that that's really valuable. I think they got a ton of exciting young offensive talent. And Gus Bradley being a defensive guy, if he can build something, look, that division's wide open, I mean, it's not hard to imagine them winning 7 or 8 games next year, and 7 or 8 games keeps you in the playoff hunt in that division until week 16 or longer. So, I think that they're probably on the right track there, and everyone seems to love them, which does matter. When you spend that much time in a season being told what to do by somebody, how you think of that person matters. And everyone seems to really like him down there. I think the guy that I'm most interested in seeing where he lands, and I was talking with a couple folks on Twitter about this, is Hugh Jackson, and just being really glad that Jeff Fisher is getting the vote of confidence, because the last thing I would want to see is that offense coming to the NFC West with Todd Gurley and Tavon Austin.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting head coaching carousel. Also, probably the most interesting thing to me today, before obviously Chip Kelly getting fired, was the state of the quarterbacks in the AFC. Not just, we see certain guys every week 17. We do get a thing like it looks like Josh Freeman is going to be either the 1 or the 2 for the Colts, but even then, the other guy, his name is escaping me right now. The guy that they just signed off of another practice squad. Stephen Morris. Yeah, so he could be starting, but even though the Colts have a 1 in 3,000 shot to make the playoffs right now, not really playing for the playoffs this week. However,
I think they were officially eliminated with a loss because of some strength of schedule thing. With the Cincy loss.
My understanding was that actually they needed Denver to win, but
yeah,
really?
They survived because Denver won the game. If Cincinnati
they need to win a 10-team parlay, and Denver was the first one. Some of the other quarterbacks that are involved in this could be Keith Wenning of the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, Stephen Morris is one of these guys. I mean, when you look at the AFC playoff picture right now, It's going to be either A.J. McCarron or Keith Wenning, definitely going in for the Bengals. You've got the Texans going with Brandon Weeden, and their backup, I guess, is B.J. Daniels or something. You've got Brock Osweiler. Not only he's probably going to start because they've said that even if Peyton Manning, they haven't said this. Jay Glazer has said that he heard that even if Peyton Manning is healthy, they're going to stick with Brock Osweiler. You've got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is going to the playoffs for the first. Oh, he might go to the playoffs for the first time in 8 years if he can beat Buffalo. And then you've got Alex Smith, who's had 3 career playoff starts, and then you've got Tom Brady. So that's your AFC playoff field, unless the Steelers can get in with Ben Roethlisberger, which is still a possibility as well, of course. Jackson, does that blow your mind? Do you think that the Patriots are just gonna go straight into the Super Bowl, and depending on how who ends up playing at quarterback, or do you still find Denver and Cincinnati to be strong teams?
Yeah, I think Denver and Cincinnati can both beat New England. Denver did beat New England, so I don't think it's super crazy to imagine them doing it again. I think Cincinnati has the best roster in the AFC. It's just that they've got a quarterback making his first starts, and it's funny because Kenny, I remember before the season you and I talking about how I thought, and I think you agreed, that the Bengals have had a Super Bowl roster for the last 2 or 3 years. The only thing keeping them from getting there is their quarterback. And now this year, that quarterback was just killing it. Now he's gone,
Mm-hmm.
So I still think Cincinnati's the deepest roster in the AFC, certainly once you factor into injuries. Are the Patriots the best? Yeah, the Patriots are the best. The Patriots are always the best. It sucks, but the Patriots are always the best. It's just there's so many injuries now. I mean, they're just having to pull offensive linemen and running backs and receivers off the street. And Tom Brady might be my MVP pick this year because he's going to have the quietest 13-win, 4,500-yard, 35-touchdown season ever. And he's been doing it with this crazy carousel of talent around him. So, yeah, they're still my odds-on favorite, but it's just barely ahead of Cincinnati, I think. I do think that it's pretty open.
Yeah, it's interesting just to see which quarterbacks come back. I don't think they've already said. I think Dalton's out for at least the first round, probably the second. But then that's just so it breaks my heart to see Cincinnati to be put in this position where they haven't won a playoff game since 1990, and this is the best team that they've ever had.
It's like the year when they had Carson Palmer and were really good, and then on the first drive against the Steelers, they blew out his knee. It's
right.
Just like, damn it. You finally put it all together.
As a guy who, maybe pays attention to some players that don't get drafted or, go in the late rounds, do you have any opinions on Keith Wenning or Stephen Morris or, some of these guys that are going to be starting games this week?
I certainly remember Morris when he was in Miami, and you felt like he was a guy that was going to get a chance. At one point, he was being talked about as like a possible second-round pick, but he had a pretty disappointing career in Miami at a time when the Hurricanes were pretty bad overall. So he's going to get a start in this game, and maybe he can get some interest as like a backup quality guy for the next year. In terms, while we're talking about the AFC, though, I just keep thinking that for me, like the Arizona Cardinals are the most balanced team probably in the NFL right now. They've got a very good rushing attack, very good passing offense, very solid defense. And if I was a Cardinals fan sort of sitting here looking at the AFC and also looking at the way the NFC is shaping up as well, because, Seattle just lost to St. Louis and are very injured. You look at the fact that Green Bay have just collapsed. And then you've got Carolina losing their first game. And then maybe, you just wonder whether or not they've peaked and, maybe they're now going to go on the slide at the worst possible time. If you're a Cardinals fan, how anxious are you right now? Because it seems like it's there for you. Like this could easily be your year. Now you've actually just got to go out there and do it. And that can be kind of like, this could be the worst possible feeling because you're really nervous because you know that it's so capable for you to go and sort of win this thing. But now you've actually got to go and do it. And that would be driving me nuts if I was a Cardinals fan right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they've been waiting for. I've thought for a while that the Cardinals are the best team in the NFC this year, and now I think they're the best team in the NFL. If I had to put $1,000 on any one team to win the Super Bowl this year, I'm putting it on the Cardinals.
So, I mean, that's a perfect time to just talk about the Seahawks and the Cardinals. The Seahawks are coming off that game against the St. Louis Rams. So I want, everyone to just feel that this is a roundtable discussion, fire questions wherever you want to fire them. But, I've read Jacson. I know all your thoughts on the game. I've seen Rob's thoughts on the game. This seems like a game.
Whose thoughts do you like better?
My own. I think mine are the best, but it's a close 1-2-3, so that's all you need to know. No, I think that what I want to know is Jacson, as the guest, please tell me, does the loss against St. Louis change your opinion about the Seahawks' next two games? One being against the Cardinals, and the other being against we don't know yet in the playoffs.
Only mildly. I'm really happy that the Panthers lost and the Cardinals won, not because of any anti-Panthers thing, but because I wanted this game to matter. The Seahawks have shown second half of the season that they can thump some bad teams and also whatever you think Minnesota is. But I want to see if this team this year can beat a playoff team. I don't think they've beat a single team this year that's currently in the playoff picture. Correct me if I'm wrong. besides Minnesota. And, can the Seahawks go on the road like they'll have to in the playoffs and beat an elite team with no glaring weaknesses that has a big quarterback with a big arm and big receivers and the ability to stretch the cover three the way that only a few offenses can? I want the Seahawks going into, the way I put it in the article, I want them going in the playoffs with their teeth sharpened from a tough hide of a contender, instead of just feasting on some team that can't defend itself. And so I'm glad. I'm happy that this game could potentially mean a lot for Arizona. I want to see their best shot. And as far as the loss affecting it, I don't know. The year the Seahawks won the Super Bowl in 2013, they had also won 7 of their previous 8 games going into a home game in Week 16, and they lost to the Cardinals in that game. And, they bounced back fine. Pete Carroll has a 77% winning percentage coming off a loss in Seattle over the last 4 years. So I don't think that it changes who they are as a team. I don't think it changes anything about their abilities or beliefs in themselves. I think we've seen year after year the Rams are uniquely designed to give the Seahawks trouble in ways other teams can't. So no, it didn't change much for the way that I see the next 2 games. And as far as whoever their first round opponent is, this is a team that has to beat Carolina and or Arizona to get to the Super Bowl anyway. So if the difference between playing at Washington or at Minnesota or at Green Bay is the difference between a win and a loss, then they weren't going to do it anyway. So the fact that they moved from the 5th seed to the 6th seed matters, I guess, but I used to be really excited about the thought of them playing the Redskins, the way the Redskins are going right now. I think that, they're probably playing the best football of the 3 potential teams. So Seattle has shown that they can win in Minnesota, punked them by 5 scores in their place already within the last month. I think they can beat this current incarnation of the Packers team. So all that is a really long-winded way to say, no, not really.
Yeah, it's. I still stand against Washington as being anything other than, a poor man's Carolina Panthers. They're just playing nobody, and they're not, and they're even then they play nobody, and then they go out there and, all these. I love looking at stats that pop out. Like I'm all for Kirk Cousins and his ability to, put up some good numbers. 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions over the last 9 games. It's phenomenal. It's like it's almost as good as Nick Foles for the Eagles in 2013. And there's probably a lot more similarities to be made between the two. And I don't think that it's going to last. And if they ever when they do play a good team in the playoffs, if they do, it will end for them. And I do think the Seahawks are a good team, though. It is just an interesting roulette here of whatever it's going to happen for the Seahawks, and you can't really worry about who it's going to be. Rob, we do have now 3 teams that it could be. What's the best team for the Seahawks to face in the first round of the playoffs?
I don't think it really matters, and you could make sort of an argument for any of them. You could say that Green Bay are looking terrible right now, and they'd be a good team to face. And yet, do you really want to go to Lambeau in what's going to be horrible weather and, try and beat the Packers again? There's just something about Aaron Rodgers at home that you sort of never look forward to that matchup. Aaron Rodgers at CenturyLink might have been a different matter, but Washington, that they seem to be the pretty hot right now. And yet, like you say, Kenny, can you really trust Kirk Cousins to win a big playoff game? And Seattle always seems to end up playing Washington in the playoffs when they get there, and they always seem to beat them. So, you can make an argument for that. And then there's Minnesota, who, the Seahawks destroyed just a few weeks ago. And yet, if you went there, there may be that aspect of, this is our chance for revenge. We can try and establish Adrian Peterson, which they never did before. The Seahawks don't have Thomas Rawls this time. So, I don't think it matters. You could make it is going to be who it's going to be. If the Seahawks play like they did last Sunday against the St. Louis Rams, they're probably going to lose. If they play like they did in the previous 5 weeks, they're probably going to win. I think the one encouragement I've taken from this week is kind of looking at a team that maybe is similar to the Seahawks, and that is the Giants when they won their 2 Super Bowls with Eli Manning. And then going into the postseason, in 2011, the Giants actually had a 4-game losing streak before they got to the postseason, and they were at 6-6, and they even lost to the Washington Redskins at home, 23-10 in Week 15, which was a terrible, terrible loss. And they ended that season in 9-7 when they last won the Super Bowl, which is what could happen easily to the Seahawks this year. And yet they got hot in the postseason. They just found a way to win in the postseason. And that is what has to happen to the Seahawks now. That means that, your defensive linemen, Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, Bruce Irvin, they've got to turn up now. Now is the time. They've got to show up in the postseason and do what they're capable of. Your secondary players have got to be healthy and they've got to turn up. You've got to see the best of Russell Wilson because, New York had the best of Eli Manning in the postseason that year. You've probably got to have Marshawn Lynch back, and you've probably got to have him sort of rolling there, and you've got to have Doug Baldwin healthy and Luke Wilson and other guys. And if the Seahawks can do all of those things, it doesn't really matter what they do against Arizona this weekend, and it doesn't matter what they did against St. Louis. If the guys can sort of find some form in the postseason, then they can beat any of the teams in the NFC. And I just hope that they give themselves that opportunity to do it. It would be really disappointing if they got into the wild card and played like they did last Sunday and just sort of the season just fizzled out, and you've got to linger on that for the rest of the year. Until next season. But if they all come together, if they can find their best football, they've got as good a shot as anybody of making the Super Bowl again.
I mean, Jackson, you've got the Deep Balls podcast, just about to wrap up the season here, 17 weeks. Can you give us a preview here? Are you leaning towards a 9-7 season for Pete Carroll this year?
I am. Yeah, I am. I mean, frankly, I think that the Cardinals are better. Now, I think that 2 players missing really matter for the Seahawks, and that's Thomas Rawls and Cam Chancellor. I think that those are 2 really, really, really game-changing forces. And if Marshawn Lynch can come back and be the Marshawn Lynch of the last couple of years, or 90% of that, I think that comes close to answering the offensive side of that loss. And it sounds like Cam Chancellor's week to week, and if he's at his best, honestly, with Marshawn and Cam, I think the Seahawks can win 4 games in a row, 5 games in a row, even with this one. But the smart Miami, you remove your heart from it, and the familiarity with the team, and knowing kind of, we always, even when we try to be objective, we kind of inflate our own guys. If I had to bet money on it, I'm taking the Cardinals, unless the Panthers lock things up early and the Cardinals decide to pull their starters at halftime and rest up and shrink the playbook so that Seattle can't scout them as much. That could happen. But I think if both teams go at it full strength, I think the Cardinals win.
You agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, I think the Cardinals are going to win this game. I think that I don't see them sort of taking their eye off the ball. I think that they want to go into the postseason proving a point, even if they can't get the number 1 seed. I think that they've, seeming like all the teams in the NFC, they just seem to enjoy beating the Seahawks. So I think the Seahawks will be better, but I think that the Cardinals will, better than they were last week, but I think the Cardinals will ultimately win this game. And it won't bother me either. Whatever happens, just don't get any more injuries. Just get into the postseason, and let's hope that the Seahawks can get on a streak like we saw, starting with that Minnesota game on the road.
Yeah, can I ask you guys a question real quick? How many teams in the NFL would you pick to beat the Cardinals on a neutral field right now?
I wouldn't pick any.
No. I wouldn't.
I mean, all things being equal, that's just like a power rankings, right? There are probably teams.
Saying, what team would you pick to beat them this week if they were playing on neutral field?
There's not probably a team that I would pick to beat them.
Right. So
I could definitely. If they played the Patriots and the Patriots beat them by 10 points, I wouldn't be shocked either.
No. Of course not. But I guess my point being isn't that I don't think the Seahawks are incapable of playing a great game. I think that right now the Cardinals' best game beats everybody else's best game.
I think that if this game was week 16 instead of week 17, I don't think that we would be saying these things. And I think that if you were coming off of the four games that Russell Wilson had played prior to the Rams game, in which he still played a fine game despite the fact, it was just a mess out there. If the offensive line was playing like it had been playing, if the game was last week's and they're playing the Cardinals in week 16, I think I think a lot more people, perhaps everybody in this podcast right now, would be saying, I think the Seahawks have a shot to win this. So I think that
I think the Seahawks have a shot to win it, but
No, not just that. Like, you're confident. Like you're.
No,
I
wouldn't have been confident last week. And the other thing is, like last week, we wouldn't know, can the Cardinals still play defense without Tyrann Mathieu? The Packers are struggling. They went out and fucking whooped them. Like that was an absolute beatdown of a team. And the Seahawks went out and were flat. So like, yeah, if it was last week, it might be closer. But they're certainly going off the last week. And this is someone who's not too worried about the Seahawks losing in the Rams. You do have to factor in last week. And what we're seeing from the Cardinals right now is pretty juggernaut football.
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about just the Cardinals. I mean, yeah, they did beat the Packers by 30. I don't think the Packers are any good or were any good. My biggest thing would be these two teams a week ago, I think the Seahawks and the Cardinals were clearly the two best teams in the NFC, if not the NFL. And then you go out and you play a team against the Rams that just matches up perfectly with you. It's shitty conditions. You snap away 2 footballs. You fumble it. You don't, these tiny little things like you wrote about yourself that affected a game that was just fluky all the way around. If you could remove that and just think these two best teams in the NFC going up against each other head to head, when they played 2 weeks ago in Seattle, even though the Cardinals won, Football Outsiders by DVOA said this is the Seahawks' best game of the year. They outplayed the Cardinals by DVOA. If we can just say that, hey, what if the Seahawks come back this week? What if Cam Chancellor comes back this week? What if Russell Okung comes back this week? Then they play against the Cardinals, and they're the same. It's not raining outside. They can control the thing. Patrick Lewis is so fucking committed to snapping that ball properly that he's never going to do it again, and they protect the football. That's the game that I think that we're going to see, not the game that is so fresh on our minds 2 days after the results in Week 16 in their respective games. So I'm still saying, what I'm saying is, you guys are traitors, and I've got the Seahawks winning.
I can admire that. Yeah, and I won't be surprised. I mean, I'm not expecting the Cardinals to thump the Seahawks. I think that it'll probably be a one-possession game one way or another. And I'm thinking of it as like a 55-45 thing. I don't think the Cardinals have a 70% chance of winning this game. I do think the talent gap between these two teams is pretty small and might even be in favor of the Seahawks. But in terms of how that talent is playing together, the Cardinals have been as hot as the Seahawks over the last couple of months, but they've also got some wins against legit playoff teams to go with it. And so I just think the Cardinals are a better team right now. And I don't think that's traitorous to say.
They've also sort of really come on in the last couple of games. They destroyed the Packers, they beat down the Eagles as well. But they've also had some tight games where people have asked questions of the Cardinals and they've always had an answer. So like the Vikings had a really good chance to beat the Cardinals, and Arizona found a way to win the game. It was a bit of a struggle in San Francisco for Arizona, but they ended up winning 19-13. They just got by the Bengals at home. They had to sort of rally against the Seahawks to win at CenturyLink. And I can even remember a game in Week 8 when they were taking on the Cleveland Browns. And I think the Browns at one point were 14-0 up, or they certainly had a very comfortable halftime lead. And then in the second half, Arizona just took over the game. So I think that that's also a good sign for them, is that they've shown that ability to sort of when things haven't been going too great, they've still found a way to win games, and that is kind of something.
They've won every type of game this year. They've won close, low-scoring games. They've won high-scoring games. They've won comebacks. They've won blowouts. Like, there's nothing you can look on the Cardinals' resume and say, hey, if we can force them into this type of game, we'll beat them.
And that's kind of what the Seahawks have done for like a couple of years, particularly in 2013. There was a lot of ugly Seahawks games in 2013, sort of blended in with some fantastic wins against, like New Orleans and San Francisco. They had ugly wins as well. They had all types of wins, and it's sort of seeing that similarity. Arizona could easily be a 13-14 win team like Seattle was in 2013. When you look at this Cardinals team, it kind of does remind you of the 2013 Seahawks, and you kind of wonder whether or not this is a team of destiny, and that maybe Seattle is Arizona's, San Francisco. Maybe they're destined to meet in the playoffs as well, and maybe that is it's going to be in Arizona. Maybe the NFC Championship game. Maybe they will end up meeting each other again, and it's going to be sort of that similar rivalry that we have here. But ultimately, Arizona right now have got that edge because they look like the Seahawks did in 2013.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are. I don't think that they're as good as the Seahawks in 2013. Definitely. I still see a team that is loaded with weapons. They've got a quarterback that is playing at the top of his game. They've got a great, a coach that has done a great job with a terrible franchise. I still would say the same thing, that a lot of people have been saying to Seahawks fans or, prior to 2013, which is don't, get ahead of yourselves quite yet. You still got to, to get over that many years, to get over a good 100-year history, let's get to the Super Bowl. Let's see what happens in the playoffs. It's because it's the same thing that's happened to Cincinnati, just maybe Cincinnati got hurt earlier because we know how vulnerable the Cardinals can be. It's just a matter of can they do it when it matters? And it's not like I would still, of course, I have in my power rankings that came out, I have the Cardinals number 1, the Patriots number 2, and the Panthers number 3. Am I being unfair to the Panthers, Jackson?
No, I don't think so. Three sounds about right. I might even be tempted to slide Kansas City ahead of them.
Yeah, Kansas City is an interesting one for me too because it's just the same thing. Their last success came in like 1969, so I'm kind of like curious, to see what happens with them.
When they got a team.
To win 9 games in a row is great and all, but they went 9-0 in 2013, and then they fell apart. It's just reversed itself this time, and the greatest thing going for them is that somehow Alex Smith is the second best quarterback in the conference playoffs right now. It's amazing what they've done after the Jamal Charles injury.
Yep.
We've had a good. If there's anything if there's anything else that you guys want to hit on NFL wise, you can get that on now. But given that I know it's about 4 in the morning in England, I do want to give Rob a break here if possible. I've just got one other question, unless there's anything else that Jackson or Rob you want to say about the NFL playoffs or Week 17 for the Seahawks?
Not particularly regarding the Seahawks. I mean, my outlook with the Seahawks isn't much different than it's been the last few weeks in terms of where they'll finish the season at. I personally think the AFC wildcard is super, super, super interesting. I think that seeds 5 through 7 right now can all make the Super Bowl, to be honest with you. And the AFC has been so top-heavy for so long, right? Every year going in the playoffs, there's really only 2 or 3 teams in the AFC that have a legit shot at getting there. And this year, I think that there's 7 teams that can make it to the Super Bowl out of that conference. So that for me is like, if I were an objective football fan living in South Dakota without any rooting interests, watching that AFC wildcard unfold this Sunday is going to be really, really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to look at the Jets, and it's interesting to look at the Steelers if they make it in. It's very interesting as well because when you look at, I thought what was interesting that when the Football Outsiders pointed out the 14-1 teams and how Carolina stacked up against them, there was only 6 of them, and they're the worst. But of the previous 5, you've got the 91 Redskins who won the Super Bowl, and I think
best DVOA team of all time, by the way.
Right, and then it was the 4 after that. They didn't even make the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So you're only as good as what your record in the postseason is. So
yep.
I think you're only lining up right now, and then whatever happens in the playoffs is what happens. So if you're the New England Patriots, if you're the Carolina Panthers. Even if you're the Arizona Cardinals, all you've really done is given yourself a better shot because you're playing at home. But
Totally.
That's about it.
Totally.
Rob, I thought you had some. You were going to say something.
I just think that it's the Jets or the Steelers, isn't it, who can kind of sneak in there at the end. So, out of all the teams in the AFC, whoever's kind of finishes that number 6 seed, whether it is New York, whether it's Pittsburgh, they could be the team who ultimately sort of goes through here because as bad as the Steelers looked against the Ravens, they've got a really dynamic offense. They've got a quarterback that's done it before. You watching the New York Jets beat the Patriots. I mean, it was an overtime win, but they kind of handled New England for the whole game and just let it get away from them late on. So, the Jets could easily, sneak up on a few teams here and make a bit of a run at this, especially when you look at the top seeds and, is Andy Dalton going to be healthy? There's some suggestion that he won't be. New England were just on fire at the start of the year, but don't look like quite the same force now. And Brock Osweiler and Denver, they could easily go to the Super Bowl, or they could go out in the first game they play in the playoffs. So it's wide open, and like Jacson says, it's really fascinating. I think it's going to be a lot more wide open, and I think it's kind of setting itself up for whoever comes out of a tougher matchup in the NFC. Whoever kind of wins the NFC is probably going to be heavily favored to go on and win the Super Bowl.
Should be interesting playoffs. Definitely, I think the AFC, you've got, like Jacson said, whatever 6 teams make it, but now there's 7 that are alive, and it's so close. And I think in the NFC, you've really got 3 teams, and that's it. And
I agree. Is there a single of those 7 teams? Would there be one outcome of one team beating another team that would shock either of you?
If anybody winning a playoff game besides Tom Brady will shock me. So it just
even if it's Ben Roethlisberger?
None of them have ever done it. Alex Smith has one. Well, yeah, if Ben Roethlisberger gets in, then it's probably going to be, if Ben Roethlisberger gets in, they'll be the 6th seed, so they would play the Patriots in the second round, right? So yeah. It's confusing.
Isn't it frustrating that you could have a team like the Jets in the Super Bowl, or the Brock Osweiler-led Denver Broncos could be there, and that last year when the Seahawks got there, they got a super pumped up Tom Brady and the New England Patriots sort of playing as well as they did. I've been written off after about 4 or 5 weeks in the season that the team that gets there this year could play a team that is just going to be completely overmatched against whether it's the Cardinals, the Seahawks, the Panthers, or whoever it is.
Totally. Yep.
It's kind of frustrating.
It's going to be a good playoffs, and I'm curious. I can't wait for this week to get over. And for me personally, there's nothing better than the NFL playoffs, though they are so damn fleeting. You go from 16 games a week to then you get 4 games and 4 games and 2 games, and then it's 1 game and then it's over. But it will be. I think you're going to get a lot of really good games this year out of the playoffs. Because this is a draft podcast as well, Jacson, I do want to get your thoughts on the college football because I know you're a big college football fan. Were you disappointed in this season of what you've seen so far? Do you think it was a great season of college football? You've got Leonard Fournette and Derrick Henry and Connor Cook and all these other things, Clemson and Alabama coming back. What did you think of the season?
Well, I'm going to preface it by saying 2 things. One, I am everybody's least favorite kind of college football fan. I'm a Notre Dame fan. And 2, I don't claim to be any sort of guru when it comes to projecting college success in the NFL. It makes me incredibly envious of guys like Rob Satin who can do that. But that said, so as a Notre Dame fan, I thought they were an awesome team to watch. I think their bowl game against Ohio State is going to be so interesting. Notre Dame, everyone just roots for them to lose, and I get it, and I'm never going to try and change any of your guys' minds on that. But truly, that was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, they lost their quarterback in week 1, and their backup came in and was amazing. They lost their running back in week 2. Their backup came in and averaged like 150-something yards rushing per game. They got some amazing wide receivers and some really, really high-end defensive talent. They lost 2 games this year, and it was by 4 total points to the number 1 undefeated team in the country and to Stanford. So, I thought I had that was just a fascinating season to watch. Ohio State was really, really interesting. They seemed unassailable going into the season, and they were almost done in by how many options they had at quarterback. It seemed like they never really found a groove, and kept waiting for them to just hit and find that November surge where they blew everyone out. Didn't happen. They ended up missing out entirely. I think Michigan State has had one of the weirdest seasons ever. I mean, when you consider that they're in the playoffs after just, laying the steaming pile against Nebraska, and how close they were to losing to Michigan, with one of the craziest college football plays of all time. And, I think that Mark D'Antonio is a super interesting coach. I think that he is really, really, really underrated. So I like them. Alabama, of course, you got your standard powerhouse. You've got the Oklahoma resurgence. But the team I'm cheering for is Clemson. Clemson has been just secreting NFL talent for a decade now, and it's never all come together. But they got the best defense in the country, and I'm excited to see how it stacks up against Oklahoma and then against whoever wins between Alabama and Michigan State. I think Derrick Henry is one of my favorite players to watch in recent memory, simply because you're talking about a 20-year-old, 21-year-old who in games 12 and 13 of a season, more games than he's ever played in his life, gets a combined, 89 carries or something like that at 5+ yards a clip against good defenses. I think that's a pretty amazing thing. So, hard to condense a season into a short little soliloquy, but I loved this college football season. As bummed as I was that Notre Dame missed out on the playoffs, I think that this was like a really great, interesting season. Iowa has been a joke forever, and they came really close to getting into the playoffs. I think, what are they, ranked 5th or 6th right now? So, yeah. Big college football fan, and as a fan and not a college football analyst, I really, really enjoyed watching this year.
Were there any? I know you say you like Derrick Henry. Were there any other players that you see in college football that you just can't wait to see in the NFL?
Yeah, Coleman, the Baylor receiver, I think is pretty amazing, and I want to see if he's just a product of Art Briles or if that can transfer. Obviously, Leonard Fournette has NFL fans drooling. I think is a really fascinating player. McCaffrey is going to be interesting to see how he fits at the NFL level. I mean, he seems to be a legit playmaker. I wonder, it's weird. I wonder that if he wasn't white, if I wouldn't see him as a more dynamic player than I see him.
Speak to racism real quick. We're open to you talking about
let me
politics and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Let the culturally sequestered Northwestern white male talk about race. I think there's a lot of interesting players. Jaden Smith out of Notre Dame, that's a player that I'm a huge fan of, as you mentioned. Rob mentioned him as a top 5 pick. I mean, I didn't realize.
Rob loves him. Rob, you want to speak? You want to give Jackson,
pump me up
tell
here.
him how much
Pump
you
me
like
up,
him.
because I was thinking he was a first rounder. I had no idea he was so highly regarded.
Yeah, he could be the best. He could be the best player in the draft. I mean, he just incredible. He's like a thoroughly modern day linebacker, isn't he? I mean, he's got great range. He could probably play any position, any scheme. I just love his celebration, like he's throwing a ball down the bowling alley. It's just, everything about him is really, really good, and it won't surprise me at all if he kind of, if Cleveland didn't want to go with a quarterback, for example, they could easily look at someone like him and say, we can build around this guy on defense. So
totally. I mean, I think he could be a Luke Kuechly type middle linebacker, to be honest. Like, the thing that always blows me away, and it's so funny because my wife just rolls her eyes while we'll be watching football and something will happen. I'll be like, babe, you got to see this. And I found myself doing it with Jaden Smith a lot, because he would do this thing that has always blown me away about Cam Chancellor, is he'd make tackles in the hole where he would completely knock the ball carrier backwards. I mean, not just tackle him, but destroy him. And you watch the replay, and he didn't have a running start. He was coming off of one step of changing direction, and he's still just leveling dudes. And to create that kind of leverage without a running start is amazing. All the top guys can make it to SportsCenter if you give them a 10-yard head start and let them line up a guy. But when you can shake off a blocker and one step later, put a guy on his butt, that's a truly special Ray Lewis-esque quality, and I love watching him.
I mean, I don't even know that much about him, so I'll be excited to see all these guys that Rob talks about as far as their NFL prospects. That, a lot of these guys, like you said, that not everyone else, and not even a lot. Some of these players, not a lot of mock draft analysts and experts aren't even putting in their first round. So it'll be interesting to see how things shake out. But when you talk about an exciting defensive player at such a position that's able to move around the field so much, that's when you want to get excited. This guy could be the next Aaron Curry for all I care. But I think that's it for 3000 NFL mock draft. We managed to get in some hot breaking news to talk about. Plenty of Hawk talk, playoff
Way to break
talk.
the story, guys. Really, really impressed.
No, yeah. I talked to Jeff Elury, and that was it. We said, let's do it. And I said, let's do it. Let's get rid of Chip. Jackson, you can follow it on at Jacson Bevens on Twitter. You've got the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Is that coming out now on iTunes?
Yeah, Danny and I are working on getting that set up to the RSS feed. We've had a number of flattering requests for that, so we're working on it. Certainly, I'll have it up by next season, but we're trying to get it on iTunes before the playoffs.
Sounds good. Everybody, make sure after the games, to get those Cigar Thoughts on fieldgoals.com. This was a difficult one to write for you this week, wasn't it, Jackson?
Yeah, it's something that I mentioned to Kenny and a couple of others while I was writing it. That's the hardest article I've ever written. So it sounds like it was received fairly well for the most part. I'm happy about it. The whole game experience was so gross feeling, and also I didn't think it was that consequential. So it's just kind of makes it tough to figure out a tone for a story.
Don't you guys both think, Rob and Jackson, don't you guys think that if the Seahawks win the Super Bowl this year, and I'm not saying like, they're going to win the Super Bowl, but, they've been to the last two, but if they win it this year, it's going to be something like even extra special, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, geez Louise, we're talking about one of the top 2 or 3 most heartbreaking losses in the sport's history that they would overcome, on top of all that goes with having, all the contract stuff that they've never had to deal with. I mean, I think this has probably been the most challenging career or year of Pete Carroll's career. If they won a Super Bowl this year, I mean, the dude is unassailable for life. It would be in just absolutely so enjoyable and such a cathartic experience because, Super Bowl appearances, even if you're cheering for the best team in the NFL, you still got maybe a 1 in 4 chance of getting there. And they should all be appreciated and cherished. And if we got 3 in a row, that would be truly something special.
Yeah, I think that it would be extra special. And I remember sort of after the last Super Bowl, kind of sitting down, and I didn't talk to my wife for like 2 days because, basically what. I mean, the story, Kenny. I don't think Jackson was probably with us when I said this, but the Super Bowl finished at like 5 o'clock in the morning over here, and I had to start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I didn't go to sleep. I just went straight to work, and was just like a zombie for the rest of the day. I was probably in bed when my wife got home. I didn't see her for like 2 days, and then on the 3rd day after the Super Bowl, I said to her, "Look, I want you to sit down and watch the final drive with me, and I just want to sort of just be upset about it." And she very kindly sat there and we watched it together. And I was really devastated by that. And the thing that sort of hurt me the most by it was not so much the fact that they lost that one game. It was that for me it felt like they'd lost they were at risk of losing the opportunity to be the team of the decade, to be a team that everybody would remember, and sort of that in 10-15 years time people would go, hey, this team reminds us of the the Seahawks of that era. And winning 2 Super Bowls would have kind of cemented that. It wouldn't have mattered what they did for the next sort of 5 or 6 years. To win back-to-back Super Bowls would have cemented their legacy. And I'm concerned now that their legacy is going to be, hey, can you remember that Super Bowl that they blew with the last play when they should have run it to Marshawn Lynch? And that would not be fair on Pete Carroll. That would not be fair on Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch and the rest, and Richard Sherman and the rest of these guys, if that is how they're remembered. So if they to go back and win it this year, they'd be remembered instead as the team that had that the most incredible adversity and the biggest challenge that any team has ever faced, and they still came back and won it again. And that would, I think I could probably die a happy man thinking that was, that is how this team was remembered instead of what happened last year.
Yeah, I think it would be if they lose this week and then they get into the playoffs at 9-7. I don't think that you could. I think you could put them up against any 9-7 team that's ever made the playoffs. 9-7, 10-6, in that sort of range. It's not your typical team to be like that. When you look at every single one of their losses, except for the 2 losses to the Rams, their other 4 or 3 losses all coming to teams that were in the top position when they played. And
Yep.
It'll be very interesting, but I don't think that the team that is going to make the playoffs, the team that will play in the playoffs, I don't think we've seen that team yet. And it might be worse, it might be better, but I think that the team that plays, I think they'll get past the first round. The team that plays in the second round, if you're talking about a team that has Cam Chancellor and Marshawn Lynch, I think it's a different team, and I think that we haven't even seen that team this year. And it's interesting, one last note, because of something that you talked about, Rob, is that you're not sure exactly if Marshawn Lynch comes back, if he'll be the same player, or if the team will accept him as the player that he once was. Can you sort of talk about that?
Well, I think the team will accept him, right? The players seem to have a tremendous respect for Marshawn Lynch, and I'm sure that he would be welcome back, and beast mode is back. I just wonder whether or not. I wondered when Thomas Rawls was there that if Lynch came back and Rawls was still healthy, that you could sort of work a role for both of them. And I think the best example of that was when Thomas Rawls had his 169-yard game against Cincinnati. The following week against Carolina, he had 1 carry for 8 yards. So as soon as Marshawn Lynch was back, he took every snap in that Carolina game. He was the focal point again. And it would have been a very awkward situation having Marshawn Lynch coming back into the offense and trying to sort of split the carries or have a committee, because I get the sense that Marshawn Lynch thinks, I'm Marshawn Lynch, I'm the sort of the leader of this offense, I'm going to get most of the snaps here. And I think that's why Pete Carroll is so against using the term running back by committee, because I think he feels that is almost offensive to Marshawn Lynch, and that's why he wants to avoid it. But now that Rawls is injured, and now that the Seahawks kind of need Marshawn Lynch back, and I do think they need him. I think that he will sort of draw attention in a way that Bryce Brown and Christian Michael is not. Teams will have to respect Seattle's running game more. So I just think it's the perfect storm for him to come back now. It's a great story. I don't want to sort of look back on what was another bad memory for Seahawks fans, which is sort of the Jerome Bettis and the way that all finished. But you kind of just wonder whether or not it's set up now for Lynch to come back and just have this great story that this is, maybe he retires at the end of the year after helping Seattle to some redemption and a second Super Bowl ring. That would be.
And Santa Clara is not that far from Oakland either. To keep the Jerome Bettis log on.
So it's perfect. It's set up. Let's hope that it happens. And I'd love to see him back. I don't care whether he plays in this game against Arizona, but let's have him back for the wild card game. Let's have Cam Chancellor back. Let's have Russell Okung back, and let's see the Seahawks at something akin to sort of relative health and giving themselves the best chance to go far in the postseason.
Yeah, it is interesting. If he doesn't, there was the idea that if he comes back for Arizona, maybe it just gives him a chance to get back and then be ready for playoffs. But you could also argue that the Seahawks shouldn't show anything that's in their hands right now. Leave all your tricks up your sleeve. You don't have to play all your best players. If someone's kind of hurt, don't play them, because at this point it doesn't even necessarily look to us like the 5 seed or the 6 seed really matters. So the Arizona might have actually does have more to play for than Seattle does right now, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. And that is the end of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Come back next week for another episode. We'll be talking about the playoffs. We'll be talking about the College Bowl Series. Follow Jacson on Twitter at Jacson Bevens. Cigar Thoughts, fieldgoals.com, Rob Staten at Rob Staten, SeahawksDraftBlog.com, and that's it. So thanks, Jacson, for stopping by. And
I missed you guys, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, always a pleasure for sure. We'll have another one with you back on here much sooner than it took for this one, okay?
Sounds great to me.
All right. See you guys next week.